So, another stream today, and this is going to be um, a bit more focused than the last stream, because I actually have stuff planned out. And um, what is this stream about and why we're doing it? So, I just put up an art installation today on the street on top of an advertisement. I had a particular thing that I did with an intervention with some of my uh, AI generated sacred icons. I have multiple lanes for my visual art, and the AI art is just one lane, and I have this particular thing that I do with is kind of the main thing I do with it, where I make sacred icons that are abstract in a set, and I have an article about this on my website, and I won't get too into it, but um one of the principles of what I'm going to discuss today regarding sacred art is that you are always engaged in multiple domains and not fully submitting to any of them, and none of them are kind of your definitive statement. This is called the principle of arrogation, and we'll get to it later. So in the spirit of combining everything together, I'm pairing together an art move with a philosophy move. And so we're going to talk about the theory of total art today. Also, it is Sagittarius season. We are Transcendental Qabala, which is, if you don't know, this is the system of philosophy developed by Hila Hunt Hendricks that combines critical continental philosophy, especially the work of Lacan, Marx, Hegel, Deleuze, with Eastern Orthodox theology and especially sociology, speculative stuff. Anyway, that's too much information. System of philosophy developed by Hila Hunt Hendricks, and a lot of the things that I end up talking about on this channel are my interpretations of her system and kind of expanding on them based on my own philosophical studies and reflections, and talking about basically how to make use of them, how to apply them, why I think they're relevant, and trying to encouraging deeper thought that goes outside the way that philosophy is normally discussed online and approached. So, oh, interesting. Why can't it see my left hand? Anyway, that doesn't matter too much. But I want to gesticulate. Come on. Okay, that's fine. Anyway, I can only get one in my hand. I have my hands in front. Anyway, that's I always get silly with it with the VTuber stuff. What was the other thing I wanted to say? There was another thing that I wanted to say to start. Let me pull up my notes. Oh yeah. It's mapped to the zodiac, and we're actually. I don't think I have at any point actually been synced up to where the system is, in the zodiac in any of my streams, but today, I actually am. So that's perfect. So where to start? Well, I want to start by kind of summarizing kind of bits about Transcendental Qabala as a whole, to kind of situate what we're even talking about with the idea of total art. So I guess I didn't even say that. It's in the title of the stream. But we're talking about the theory of Meta-Perichoresis, which is a theory of total art, and total art is, in this case, a kind of art that combines music, philosophy, and drama, which within Transcendental Qabala, these are very loaded. Each of these words don't mean quite what they ordinarily mean. They have kind of a lot more in them. But they and kind of specify a field of possible human endeavors in their purest forms, and I'll kind of get to that a little bit more later. Combines music, philosophy, and drama, also combines forms of music, philosophy, and drama from across different regimes, um, and brings them into kind of a life. You're living a life that has particular works in it and is kind of touching people and going out into the world, but also changing yourself. And there's kind of something in you that's special that you want to kind of bring into the social fields that is supposed to be special and kind of help move the world forward. And anyway, that's getting a little bit ahead of things, but we'll specify kind of a little bit what each of this means. So the kind of basis of Transcendental Qabala is, the kind of real crunchy meat at the center of this system is this thing called the four cardinals, which are essentially um so relative to what we're talking about with art has to come from some subject, or to be a subject, and or to be addressed to a subject. So what a subject is, this um very philosophically loaded term that gets used a lot. And I actually, for some reason, I just wanted to kind of ponder this just a little bit. Like it's sometimes used to refer to like the self, um, or but you have to think about like a subject, like a royal subject, someone who's subject to a king, and that's kind of the origin of the word. Like the Latin word "jacto" means to throw, and sub means under. So "sub-jacto" is like to throw under your. But you can, so subject is kind of subordinate to something, but it also like has something that belongs to it in the sense of like subject object relationship. Um, for me, I tend to think of the subject in terms of a question. Um, and uh, so what do I mean here? So like art art is issuing forth from somewhere, and you're trying to speak to someone issuing forth from somewhere. And uh using this system, um I want to, well, starting with talking about the subject a little bit. Oh my god, this is more, I'm more all over the place than I expected to be. I thought I had this all together. Anyway, there are four faculties that each person as an individual has, and they relate to how the world is structured as a whole. And they are used to kind of talk about everything else in the system. And they're called ascesis, catharsis, fervor, and majesty. And because this is a short summary, I can't get too into what each of them are. But the important thing is that they're all real and they're all relevant, and you need to use all four of them. Ascesis roughly corresponds to um, the religious impulse and the religious world. So this is kind of uh, self-restriction, withdrawal from the world, uh, cultivation of the chakras, contact with angels and higher realms, like religious love, and self-sacrifice. Um, just trying to reach Christ consciousness. Um, and then catharsis is uh, reason, rationality, um, scientific thought. Catharsis proceeds by kind of setting down rules and working with a kind of splicing apart a given material and trying to kind of say everything about it. Hence why it's called catharsis, and it involves like um, negativity as a mode of thought, because there's this kind of strict separation between the subject and the object. Like it's the object is taken as a thing to be under study. So like so you can think about it in science, like you're totally immersing yourself in the world, in trying to figure out what this thing is that you're confronted with. Um, Anyway, that's a pretty bad way to talk about it. And then fervor is a faculty that relates to art and to the unconscious and to creativity and also to transgression, and towards the future. With fervor, there's some kind of attractor from the future that is calling you forward to it that you don't fully understand yet, but if you bring it into the light of day, it'll make more sense, like with the work of art, or like, for example, if you are trans or know someone who's trans, like gender relates to this. There's some kind of secret truth that the world isn't quite ready for, that you have to fight for to kind of bring it forth. And you have to there's this. I'm rewatching the Rick Roderick Nietzsche lectures, and Nietzsche is really exemplary of this. But there's this phrase that I've just popped into my mind, like if something is shaky, then kick it over. This is kind of what fervor is about. And then majesty doesn't quite makes sense, like, or majesty is sort of a fourth thing, but it is sort of kind of the unit. It's kind of its own thing, but it's kind of also the unity of all the other four. It's kind of the thing that's left by those three. But majesty is relates to like ordinary low intensity life. Like the other three all relate to kind of elevated forms of experience and consciousness, whereas majesty relates to just the quotidian, to just power, to routines, to just kind of pain and loss and kind of ordinary life. um and uh and also in this way sort of points towards a kind of perfected version of that, where like the other three would be integrated into ordinary life, where like ordinary life would be as intense as the other three promise, but also that the other three would also kind of carry the fragile beauty of ordinary life. Oh my goodness. Cool. um and then each of these, okay, let me go in the order that I wanted to go in. And then so art um is situated in terms of trying to kind of give someone access to it's trying to create access to a more intense form of reality, sort of, that we talked about. Oh shit, that's an alarm going off. Fuck. Okay, that's fine. um and there's kind of a relative and absolute form of reality that art can be oriented towards. The relative form of reality is, in this system, is called the Genesis Call, and basically, this is the the idea of contradiction and necessary forms of appearances. From like critical philosophy, the idea is that there are contradictions in your own soul and in the social field and in like the world and in production. And this is, you could think of it um as political contradiction between um within a party or between parties, or like political deadlocks. You could think of it as like in science, the conflict at the kind of edge of developments, where like there is general relativity in quantum physics and we haven't figured out how to put them together yet. Or within artistic movements, there's these kind of forces that are tugging at each other. There's things that don't quite work, or and that people are trying to push forward. um within a given life, you have multiple things that you want, that can't all work, that don't fit together, and the conflicts between resources that are available to you and your desires. um anyway, and so there's all these contradictions. And art has like true works of, so I'm using art, and I could be using art, I should be more specific, but like real powerful endeavors, um of the kind that you want to be doing, of the kind that are free and powerful and loving. are able to kind of nag, or not nag, like gnaw, tug, there we go, on these contradictions in your own soul and in the world's. And there's some sort of idea that like pressing down on these as a pressure point will sort of move the world forward. And it may upset people, and it's probably really difficult, but that there's a that it's basically what's worth doing. And so that's kind of the relative real, and then there's a sort of absolute real, which is God, um, or HAQQ specifically, like, is God the Father as pure difference, and it's a kind of difference. So the relative real of the Genesis call is real as contradiction, whereas difference as contradiction, whereas HAQQ as God the Father cannot be said to either be contradictory or not contradictory. It's sort of beyond our comprehension in this way, like the dogmatic religious view given to us by revelation is that God is love, and God does not have the kind of painful contradictions in themselves that we have. And so the kind of infinite remove that God the Father has from the world, and like the fact that there is a Trinity, is not a problem of pain. Um, it's not a problem of pain, and it's not a problem of real contradiction, that somehow three and one and infinite distance are loving and gift and heal. But it's beyond our ability to actually say. We have reason, which seems to kind of point towards. Oh my God, I'm talking too much about these things. Reason seems to point towards the world and its pains and its lacks and its contradictions, and says one thing, and then revelation and kind of religious experience says another. But it's beyond our ability to say. It's beyond our ability to say. Um, and uh, beyond our ability to say. Um, and then an important thing related to this. So I'm talking about these contradictions. There is a movement between historical paradigms that each have their own contradictions. So there at any given time in the world, there is like the angels and the world of ideas, the world of forms, um, are trying to kind of do one thing. They're trying to pull us towards certain kinds of perfections. And then on the other hand, you have the world of matter, and the world of production, and the world of sin, and the world of kind of wounds and possibilities that I was just talking about. And this is kind of riven by contradictions, as it's trying to we're trying to strive towards God. And at any given time, they're in any given regime of one's life, or of a scene, like a cultural scene, or of especially of world history. There are these contradictions, and they form like a kind of package that you can analyze. Um, and they seem to have a sort of progression. And for example, the progression from feudalism to capitalism. Um, and there is the most important and most relevant ones are Urizen and Varizen, um, which are they're sometimes the called the like disciplinary society and the control society by certain theorists. Um, Basically, after the Renaissance and colonialism and the 30 Years' War and the rise of managed capitalism and the centralized state, there was a regime of power that arose that was very focused on administration and rational accounting, and numbers and division of the world into discrete units of time, and trying to kind of like control everything by representing everything, this sort of very kind of tight knit control of the world. And this uh allowed um so basically, like the kind of regime of matter has this sort of will to power where it's trying to always expand itself and moving towards the infinite, and there's this kind of confusion and conflict within itself and with its own kind of good desires and bad desires, and just kind of like desire as such with other desires within itself, um that regime, that previous regime, kind of dissolved under its own weight because it created this world system of communication and free, and all these kind of people whose minds were kind of opened up by all these kind of consumer experiences, um, and or well, actually, that's skipping a part. So it kind of brought the world to big conflict with the world wars, because all these kind of regimes of power were kind of unstable with each other, and then to kind of hold everything together, it um uh it kind of had to create these new consumer subjects, but these new consumer subjects sort of caused instability within the system because they wanted not to be held down by these really rigid rationalist rules about how to do things, um, and this kind of intense cultural conformity connected with old norms and patriarchy and work culture and like racial systems and kind of oppressive religious beliefs and these sorts of things. And so there was a kind of explosion of um of a kind of libidinal consciousness that wanted to kind of get out of this rationalist system that is, you can see especially within the 60s with the Summer of Love, and also like the civil rights movements and the May 68 uprisings in Paris, um where there's this creation of this new regime is trying to jump out from this old one, and this new regime is sort of where we're in right now. Like, we aren't completely in it still, and it's also possible that we're already moving from this one to the next one, but this one is much more, instead of centralized, power is much more fractured. Um, and power is much more fractured, and there's a big emphasis on kind of local scenes of control, but the local scenes of control are sort of powered by the same like data technology that was developing in the last one. So now everyone is sort of monitored and their preferences are known very precisely. But instead of that being used to force them to do one kind of thing that everyone else does, now everyone has their own little consumption bubble that controls their minds and kind of exploits their desires to keep them passive, and tries to find them a kind of micro community of belonging. Um, and uh and there's the, internet consciousness is continuing to cause instability, um and also opens up certain possibilities of, like, the you have access to all these tools now that are so easy to get to your door, but they sort of rely on exploitation, and the world itself is being torn apart in order to keep this regime going. But at the same time, there's this kind of, if you are in the right place in the system, you're able to have this kind of magical life almost that one couldn't otherwise. Like, me being a trans woman is who's doing a VTuber stream on the internet, is a perfect example of this. Um, and at any given time in one of these regimes, there is this kind of bleeding edge of new ideas and new forms that is fomenting, where, like, there are kinds of people who are going a little bit crazy because they can sort of see that, like, new ideas getting born and dying, like things kind of being unmade in real time. This is a thing that I read a book by Kandinsky recently where he was talking about this, and in Hyla Hunt Hendrix's philosophy, she calls this aesthetica. Um, and capitalism is kind of doing this faster than any system had before, where like forms are constantly being torn apart and unmade. And this is why like, nothing that you really, all the stores, the old local stores that you loved get torn down, and everyone has to move, your friends all have to move. And anyway, I talked about this for too long, this section for too long. And then basically this opens up on the possibility of the kind of fulfillment of all these kind of movements between these series of contradictory regimes that kind of restrict power and kind of cause strife. That there could be a perfect one that brings together everything that was good about each of the previous regimes, because like that's another important thing to note, is like each regime has certain positive and negative aspects. I was just talking about some of the positive and negative aspects of this one, but there was something kind of lovely, there's something good for, depending on who you are, about like the more focused forms of attention and kind of people actually being well learned in the previous era, and the kind of social rules not being as immensely all over the place and complicated, and people not having to be so in their heads because they're not being forced to enjoy everything completely all the time. And like, and anyway, but there's this possibility of a kind of completion of the series. And that this is, Marx would call this communism, and religious people would call this heaven, and in this system it is called Haelegen. And this is the potential next form that things could take, if you know with a combination of human and divine effort. And it requires a combination of like kind of religious hope and openness and love, combined with like hardcore effort to kind of understand the world, and experimentation, artistic, rational faculties pushed to their max to understand the world through history and philosophy and science, and then irrational faculties pushed to their max with experimental art and aesthetic training and kind of like sensuous openness. Um, anyway, and the and then this kind of music, philosophy, and drama are three kind of approaches to this. Music relates directly to God, and to like being. Music kind of resonates and has this kind of quality where you want to hear it again and again, and it like it relates to theology. So music, music as a kind of broad field of practice designates like um religious endeavors, uh and um shoot, there was something I was going to say, but I don't remember. Religious endeavors, theology, but also music as such, just making real music. And then philosophy is, thinking. Philosophy is more like what it sounds like, but it also like would include, oh, I misspelled philosophy. That's funny. It would include like, authentic scientific work, um, just hardcore thought about the world and about history. And then drama is like lived life, that is kind of responding to the things, acting within a regime that has been kind of set by music. Like music, it kind of creates a regime because it issues forth from God when it is in its highest mode. And then philosophy sort of defines the possibilities of a regime, and then drama sort of like, you know finds holes in those possibilities and kind of enacts them. But like drama is a term that relates to kind of what is normally thought of as art proper, but it's called drama because it's meant to be more expansive and includes like just living your life out in a particular way, and that is kind of aesthetic and beautiful, and where it involved aspects that are what is traditionally thought of as art, but also like stuff that just isn't traditionally thought of as art, but you take it seriously as part of your art practice. Um, and then it moves through, art as such moves through so many stages. There is act, scene, motive, and stage, which I talked about in a previous video, and then the end goal is Haelegen, which is I talked about earlier, is heaven, and it has 4 laws: sovereignty, hierarchy, emancipation, and individuation. These are descriptions. They're laws, but also rights. They're descriptions of what life will be like in heaven, where it's. Oh, how much do I want to get into those? Um, I'll just talk about them in brief. Sovereignty is essentially kind of um, different. So subjects, um, which could be individual subjects, like people, or collective subjects, like, I don't know, potentially, I know people who want to be in a hive mind or something in the future, and probably stuff like that. But whatever it is, these sort of subjects will be beyond what we are. So this is they will have faculties and a relationship to the world that is more intense and different, and kind of, we can try to imagine it, and that's part of what describing these laws are, but is trying to imagine it, but we can't imagine what it would be like living out these 4 things all the time. We can only kind of hold space that if we press on the contradictions, like I said earlier, something will break through that will allow this. Um, and there is an intellectual idea that we can do this, that is developed through critical philosophy, but also a kind of religious hope that at any time God could just step in and fix things. And we hold hope for that as well, and don't try to do everything ourselves. But anyway, sovereignty is subjects becoming more uh, free of kind of things outside of themselves. So a movement towards self rule and what's the word, autonomy, as opposed to um heteronomy, um, and control of oneself, ability to understand one's own true will, um, and to have kind of direct contact with God. Um, and then hierarchy is, these individual subjects that have kind of coalesced in sovereignty are arranged in optimal configurations that function with um, high intensity and high efficiency, through interlocking of kind of deep, um, through interlocking of skills and needs and desires and deep unconscious fantasy. Um, you can think about in the little flashes of this in a way where if you have a um, both in a kind of practical and non, what we ordinarily wouldn't call practical domain, where if you're in love, you have something that you bring to the table that your lover needs unconsciously and doesn't fully understand, um and they do the same. Or in a band, you have a songwriter who has a particular vision, and then they need other musicians who to help them realize the vision, and there's this kind of deep satisfaction that's gained. Or if you have someone who really is really a really motivated parent or a teacher, they derive this really deep satisfaction from kind of helping this other person out to kind of grow in skill and knowledge. And then if you're under this kind of really good teacher, there you just you receive energy. There's just this energy that's going back and forth. There's this idea, the rationalists, internet rationalists, like to talk about Pareto frontiers. And this is kind of what we're talking about, or from each according to his ability, to each according to her need, um, and this sort of thing. And then emancipation is becoming free, um, in a kind of different way from sovereignty. So sovereignty is like those things that are already there are kind of coalescing into kind of expunging external elements, and then emancipation is sort of like secondary external elements becoming subjects. Um, Objects becoming subjects, asserting their rights, fighting for some sort of truth that they have that demands they be taken seriously, and that there's no external limit on this is the important thing. So, like, you could think about, it's weird to think about, but you could think about like animal rights, or and then plant rights, or AI rights, and these are examples that seem almost facile, but it's this sort of thing. It's important to understand that this sort of thing could really happen, and this is holy, and we should allow it. And it can cause conflict in the social field, but the sort of reconfigurations that are necessary are worth it and good. Um, and you can see this right now with like the trans struggle, for example. Or if you're in the United States, you're kind of very aware of the long history of like racial struggle, this sort of thing. And then individuation is in the not Kandinsky, oh my god, Klasowski stream. I was talking about phantasms and simulacra. In terms of like Klasowski, individuation is like phantasms kind of progressively putting out simulacra, and kind of um, changing kind of over time in a feedback loop. So in other words, individuation is like um, each of these subjects is kind of living in a certain way and kind of taking particular acts and performing certain works, and that they're kind of evolving morally and in self-understanding, and there's something deep inside of them that is being tapped into, their kind of true self, their inner child, their guardian angel, and that is sort of kind of progressively coming into the world and coming into self-understanding. And there's this element of like succession and exhaustion, and like trying one thing and then moving on to the next. And this is basically kind of you know, living life, but in the most intense possible way, in the way that, someone who's really kind of motivated by art or science or something is really deeply in it, and they're trying one thing and then moving on to the next. Or, you know, um someone who's pursuing love in this kind of passionate way, and we're imagining in heaven that people will be doing this, but in kind of optimal configurations, and that it'll be motivated by love and expansion, and that there will be some kind of the relationship to finitude and restrictions and failures, um and and will just be different. And because like the love example reveals that there's something kind of destructive, and kind of there's these kind of false idols, and these distractions, um that people run into with individuation nowadays, and these kind of limitations of tragedies of fate, where you fall in love with someone, but then she has to move, or gets kicked out of the country or something, um this sort of thing. uh okay. So, good God, with all that said, we finally get to the actual topic of this stream. Oh God. Oh God, it doesn't fit. It doesn't fit. Shoot. Okay. The actual topic of this stream, which is the theory of Meta-Perichoresis, which is basically, what do you do in the meantime? Because we're taught, we have kind of through philosophy arrived at a vision of what heaven should be like. But we have also along the way um noted that philosophy can't stand alone. You have to be making contact with God, and creating music to kind of create these little life worlds, and then uh, philosophize about them. And then you have to, within the life worlds, you have to kind of experiment and play around and kind of poke buttons, which is art. and live your life, in a kind of intensive way to see what happens. And then so there's this. So now, what is the recommended approach to act in this life, in this world as it is right now, with all its kind of restrictions and pains and false promises and contradictions, as we mentioned earlier, um, while being oriented towards, gnawing at these contradictions and hoping for the coming of heaven and kind of bearing everything that we've just discussed in mind. Um, and uh, it is this. This is the theory of Meta-Perichoresis. It's called perichoresis is a term for the inner life of the Christian Trinity. It means dancing around. Um, God is three hypostases, or sometimes translated as persons. So there are three aspects of God that are all really separate, but all really one. And we have analogs of them in like our imagination, intellect, and will, or the imaginary, the symbolic, and the real in Lacanianism. Um, and there's sort of the ascesis, catharsis, and fervor. The I think the orders that I listed these out don't match up, so refer to the previous chart. Ascesis, catharsis, and fervor. We have these kind of faculties that relate to the Christian Trinity, are kind of human fallen analogs of them that kind of hook us up when they're in their most right form. Um, And there's this idea that if you're living a really intensive life, these kind of, um, under the grace of God, these sort of things can interlock and form a positive feedback loop that spirals out to unleash whatever power you have inside of you with the grace of God to something that becomes more than you, and is simultaneously something that you're producing, but is also something that's producing you and is motivating you. There's just in this feedback loop, and it opens up a window for some divine light to get in. And so here there are four wings or four operations. She sometimes this is Hyla Hunt Hendrix's system. Wings is like we're flying to heaven. Or operations, because they're things that you do. And then integration is you are. Let me see. Let me look at my notes instead of the thing on the screen. Um, Integration is about combining different modes of freedom. So we already established there are different regimes of power and different forms that have existed in the past that are radically different from one another, and we've progressed from one to the other, and we're in a particular one right now. And then integration is you bring in resources from playing with my hair. Wait 1 second, I need some water. I've been going. Oh. Integration is you bring in resources from these different forms of freedom and make them talk to each other and kind of make them vibrate. Um, and also another important thing to note is that one of the things about the current regime of power is that, like I said, it's a bunch of micro regimes that don't want to talk to each other. Like the monoculture is disintegrating, and they want to keep these micro regimes separate. So bringing together things from different regimes across time and different regimes across space, kind of space, different areas of the current regime, and putting them together so that your work is illegible from any one of these particular worlds because it doesn't fit in any of them, and also like each of these things that are different from each other are sort of a contradiction, and they're kind of at war with each other, and there is a way that to try to experimentally resolve the contradiction. Find there's this I I've been thinking about this idea of the shortest shadow recently. The idea that, like, if the why are any two things in the world separate? Like, why is there not just one thing? And if you just take any two one things, I'm really fascinated by this idea that like there is a true name for the contradiction between any two things. Like you could reveal that how I think actually what Hegelian sublation really is. Um that like a true any two things, if you can find what really makes them different and sort of expose that, it kind of creates this third thing that is allows you to kind of um pass between the two. Like you've opened up a door and you can step through it, and this kind of operation engenders freedom in yourself because you realize how free you are and that you aren't bound by the world, and you're kind of ascending. But also it kind of, when other people see you do this, it kind of unlocks something in them where they realize that they don't have to be so bound by the rules that they think they have to follow, that things aren't so separate, that there's this kind of interpenetrability, um, interpenetration between the mind in the world, in between forms in the mind, in other forms in the mind, in between cultural regimes, and like that, like just passing between. Um, and another important aspect of this is uh, another important aspect of this is that like you bring in, you know, you generally want to bring in some combination of something that is like relevant and contemporary, and something that is kind of avant-garde or archaic. Um, you want your work needs to be relevant in some way so it actually shows up, um because you have a kind of duty to the world. Your work needs to be relevant in some way so it actually shows up, but also, it needs to be illegible. Okay. And then coalescence is essentially the kind of the most perichoresis aspect of meta-perichoresis. So coalescence is that any individual work, um and then also, all of your body of work as a whole needs to involve music, philosophy, and drama, which, when they're combined correctly, create a kind of positive feedback loop. Music, uh, or a will, philosophy, or an intellect, and then drama or an imagination. Um, so you can kind of think about this, uh, a or another religion, or some aspect that is like kind of supra-temporal, and then um historical awareness, um and that kind of is goes across linear time, and then some aspects of that is like contemporary, and everything is one thing, and or like there's this kind of, oh god, I'm not making this last point make sense. That's fine. But you make this little world, this little pocket of life that kind of propels itself forward. And then an example is, uh I just made the artwork, the art installation I did today that kind of propelled me to want to do this thing. Is um I put it out on the street on top of an advertisement in kind of a guerrilla thing. Um, and it has a kind of theoretical basis undergirding it, which is my theory of, my theory of art, and my also theology, because it's a religious work. My kind of theology about the resurrection of Christ. And then it has and then it is like, it has also just this aesthetic aspect. Like there's just something about it that made me want to do it, that I don't fully understand, something about how it looks, something about how it exists in that space, that it's just like, it just does it for me. It does it for me. That's a good phrase for what I mean. And then like it has, by being put out there, it's put out here in a way that's like visible and kind of becomes part of, and invades part of people's lives. because I did it in this very visible place, and so in this way it's kind of musical, because it's like part of being, but also like I also put perfume around it. Perfume to me is actually a form. Perfume is almost basically music. It has, it has treble, mids, and bass, and it evolves through consonants and dissonance over time, and it hits your senses in a pre-rational way, similar to how music does. It moves your body and your senses, um, and the it doesn't go through the kind of visual thing, um, and um, yeah, um, and this stream. This stream is a better kind of example. I open this stream with my own. A simpler example. This stream opens with my own music that I made for myself, and then I have this kind of particular visual presentation that is a way that I like it, and then I'm talking about philosophy. And then usually I have the background is art that I made myself, but I've been really anyway, I really love El Greco, and this is El Greco is um behind me is El Greco's Visitation. Um, the Visitation is this story with in Christianity after Mary was told via an angel that she was going to give birth to Jesus, who would be uh, the Son of God. Um, she was told that her cousin Elizabeth was also pregnant. Elizabeth was old and was thought to be unable to have children, but she also had some miraculous stuff happen. Um, and then her husband couldn't talk for a while because he didn't want to believe that it would happen. But anyway, and so they meet, and when they meet, there is this immediate transfer of there's this kind of transfer of grace. There's this sort of divine recognition, where they both have these very holy babies inside of them. Elizabeth has John the Baptist, and then Mary has Jesus. And when they meet, the John the Baptist supposedly leaps in the womb, and so there's this recognition of when you have a real unconscious artistic gift, it kind of can spark something in someone else when you kind of approach them with sincerity, and the spirit spreads. And there is shoot, there was another aspect that I wanted to note about this. Um anyway, I'm just gonna sit here and let the art let you think about the art for a second while I figure out if I can remember what I was gonna say. Oh, yes, 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 yes. Oh, yeah. Not only does it spread, but Mary, um, bursts out into poetry. Mary bursts out into not boasts bursts. Oh my God, Mary bursts out into poetry. The Magnificat is the name for it. There's this kind of Mary bursts out into poetry spontaneously from the event, talking about how God is gonna kind of bring about radical justice in the world through her, and topple nations and overturn the world order, um, and getting really ecstatic about that. And so this well, okay, we're not to catalysis yet. I keep coming back to catalysis, but you could anyway. The and then is uh irrigation is your work should be distributed in a sort of decentralized rabbit hole. So we noted earlier that, and we've brought it up multiple times, that these cultural silos have rules. There are kind of local rules and kind of global rules, and some of these rules are explicit. You're only allowed to do certain things, and then there are some that are implicit, where there's certain things that one just does not do. Oh my God, that aren't written down, and you just have to be able to pick up on them. And then arrogation is basically pushing up against these rules. You appear in a certain place in a way that doesn't quite make sense. you shouldn't you appear in multiple places in ways that don't quite make sense, because you have already formed a little world that is kind of revolving in its own little way. And then also it's like it's rhizomatic, or it's a rabbit hole. It's a rabbit hole. There's no they can't pin you down. They can't pin you down, and they can't make you useful for something because you don't belong to any one world. Because I do these streams, but I'm not a Twitch streamer. I do YouTube things, but I'm not a YouTuber. I post, I post my music in different places, and I have these different social media websites, and I have my website, and then I also exist in the world. And so now I exist as someone who makes art that exists like physically on the street. And then I have certain ways that in that I approach social situations. And anyway, and so you're the internet makes it very easy to do this. You want to make your work exists as a rabbit hole. Um, and it draws people in and turns everything in the world into materials for you, instead of you being a thing that is used by the world. Um, and then uh, and then catalysis is basically the thing that should happen if you're following everything else. You're activating the object within the subject activates the subject within the object. So what does that mean? So this special thing that you have inside of you, your special thing to give to the world that brings the world closer to heaven, this kind of holy thing inside of you. um you are creating and living in a way that puts it out so that it activates. And so that's the object within the subject. And then the subject within the object is other people who are normally inert consumers, or just kind of going about their lives unfocused on things, are activated. Um, they're activated suddenly by your work. Because it's beautiful, it's integral, it's experimental, it's disruptive. It's all these things at once. And where you're opening up a little hole where heaven could come through. And so there's this idea, I mentioned earlier, the combination of um hardcore labor to understand the world and to make stuff that is like rigorous and actually takes skill and is like really put together and isn't just kind of shoddy, but is also kind of pushing some kind of limit and experimental, and not kind of um uh submitting to rules, um and but is has this kind of love at the center. Um uh and and so there's you're pushing forward in a almost Promethean way to the next era. But you aren't trying to kind of define exactly what it is beforehand. You're kind of holding space for something to intervene, and for kind of God to do what God's going to do on God's own time, or for things outside of you that you don't understand, or for your own unconscious, which you can't understand, to kind of do their own thing. Um, and yeah, the idea is, we hope for the perfect world, for heaven to come. And then I guess to end, I just want to talk about Jesus Christ a little bit. My favorite. My favorite. Um and then actually, let me wait. This is the wrong kind of media file. Okay. I just want to show. I'm just because I already have one El Greco painting. I want to put my favorite up here as I talk about this. it is important that that everything that we're talking about here be connected to and connected to the person of Jesus Christ. There's something about the person of Jesus Christ that is special and that no one really owns, no one kind of has the definitive answer on. No one fully understands what Christ was, what Christ did, what it means, and one should keep an open attitude towards this. Um, but there's something about Christ's life that is kind of an archetype for what an artist is. Christ lived as the most powerful possible version of this, but a kind of entry of the divine into the world. Some kind of special singular thing enters the world. Um, a special thing enters the ordinary in the same way that a beautiful work of art breaks into the world. And then there is a kind of range of possibilities that Christ is exploring within his ministry. He has. He's going to these different areas, and sometimes what he's doing works, and sometimes people kick him out. And then he gets his disciples. He has his apostles, and they're bickering amongst themselves. And then one of them betrays him, and so there is this kind of grappling with a finite situation, and making kind of concrete choices. John the Baptist gets arrested and then beheaded, and so Jesus kind of changes up his ministry as a result of this. He was originally doing more like what John the Baptist was doing, but then he switched to a kind of different style of ministry, and then kind of moved away and was very clever about kind of evading capture. Um, and then he there is this he's making use of cultural forms that were presented to him by his just the contingency of how and where he was born. So he's Jewish in he's a first century Jew in the Roman Empire. And so he's telling these parables and kind of talking about these theological concepts that are drawn from the milieu around him, but he's not quite using them in a way that is fully coherent to any of those systems. But it is legible. It's actually surprisingly legible to those systems in certain ways, but in other ways it's not. And then he's kind of fighting against the system in a way. Has this confrontational attitude where he's breaking rules and upsetting people. And then there's the purging of the temple, and declaring himself the Messiah. And then he has this kind of uh this engagement with he has this kind of complicated relationship to like sensuality, where he's dining with sinners, and and at the wedding and wedding of Cana and stuff. So there's like this, he's living a fully human embodied life. And also, like, I like to think about him walking on water. Like, what was he doing out there? He's out there just having a good time. He's out there, he's feeling everything. He's almost like a Byronic hero out there on the walking on the water, just kind of the sea spray against his face, and freaking out his apostles just because it's kind of cool, but also to prove a point, and like this strangeness of everything he's doing. And he just has this charisma. He has this charisma where people just follow him. He just says to follow them, and they know that they just got to do it. They leave everything behind for him. They leave everything behind for him. This kind of love that he incites in other people, this kind of object of affection. And then, of course, the and then but he's bringing it. He's of course a religious preacher, and talking about the that judgment and morality, and especially like the need to love God and one's neighbor with all your heart, and the immortality of the soul and the final resurrection. And then he himself is kind of modeling a new kind of human project, a kind of recapitulation of what it means to be human. Um and uh, and so that's an aspect I didn't mention earlier. So that essentially your experimental total art practice is kind of a kind of model for the way the world could be, the way that people could live. And then of course the most significant thing is that his what is called his passion and death um is the kind of central thing that he's driven by. He must sacrifice himself, and this is something that, there's something he does it at a very particular time, though, in a very particular way. He declares himself the Messiah, and then there's all these kind of aspects that are become iconic, that he embraces, because he is fully him being fully divine means that he is everything that he does is kind of a deliberate choice that he's making use of. He kind of fully accepts. um, he's kind of active in his passivity, and so there's all these aspects of how his sacrifice that become iconic, the cross and the crown of thorns and the whipping, and he's in his interrogation by authority, and but there the this aspect of him sacrificing himself, like his project is something that has to be passed on to the next generation after him, and that has to be kind of taken up. um and this aspect of letting go, um and letting those who come after you take up your project as, in their own way. You can't fully circumscribe what they're going to do with it, but then also, like, um this ultimate assertion that, the somehow also, this the finitude, the pain, the 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 powers of the world, and all these kind of compromises are ultimately, like, secondary as well. This is the resurrection. In the resurrection, that I have the painting by El Greco here of, like, the everything, all of this logic is at the same time also completely put into question. Like, everything that I just said is completely uncertain, because the resurrection kind of overturns everything regarding good sense, everything regarding necessity, everything regarding, um the sacrifice of the individual to the universal, um and everything. It's all put into question as well. There's some sort of assertion that at the end, um it will all be tied up with the glory that encompasses all of it and outstrips all of it, and makes it this guarantee that no matter what, it will be even better and even stranger than anything that we could come up with some silly theory, uh in philosophy.